Yeah.
It's done.
Okay. Okay. So we are live, so we can start. Okay. So welcome everyone to Indian Alliance Paris's webinar on the partition of 1947 in Indian classical music. So first, just briefly about IAP. So IAP or Indian Alliance Paris is like we are a bunch of the Indian diaspora who like-minded Indian diaspora, mostly based in Paris, France, and we're going to tell you more about us later after the talk finishes. So, right now, without further ado, let's begin with the event. So, we are very happy to have Yousuf Saeed with us today. So, thank you, Yousuf, for like, giving this talk. So, let me just briefly introduce Yousuf Saeed. So, Yousuf Saeed is an independent filmmaker, researcher, and designer based in India. He began his career in 1990s by co-directing the science series called Turning Point, which was aired by Doordarshan India. And since then, he has made several documentaries on a plethora of topics, starting from Ladakh to documentaries on science, and most importantly, on the arts and culture of the subcontinent. And some of his some of his popular prominent films like Inside Ladakh, Basant, Train to Heaven have been featured across like, numerous film festivals and aired in as television programs. And his latest foray has been to the active scene of campus unrest that has been going on across the country, which is capturing in the documentary Campus Rising. So Yusuf has also been a Sarai Fellow and an Asia Fellow. He co-founded Tasveer Ghar, which is a digital archive of South Asian popular visual culture. He is the author of Muslim Devotional Art in India, and he maintains a video archive called Ektara on South Asia's shared history and cultural traditions. Now, in 2005, Yusuf spent a few months in Pakistan, which culminated in making a 100-minute documentary titled Khayal Darpan on the situation of the Hindustani music practitioners in Pakistan. And today he will be talking on the same lines on the effects of the partition on the Hindustani music tradition in general. So, thank you, Yusuf, for agreeing to give this talk. Over to you. Just for one thing to all the like all the audience. So initially, I would ask you to like keep your videos off and your microphones off as well for around. So Yusuf will be talking for 1 hour. During which you can write your questions in the chat, and after the talk is over, there will be a question and answer session. Okay. So over to you, Yusuf.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Manuj. And thanks, Indian Alliance Paris, for inviting me to make this presentation. So let me begin. I'm hoping that many of you are already familiar with Indian classical music, especially Hindustani classical music. For those of you who are new to this subject or not sure, let me give a little background about it. I mean, we all know that India has many kinds of traditions of music. There are classical music, which is a very, very elite kind of music, patronized by very elite. And there is the more light classical music. There is folk music, popular music, all sorts of music traditions in India. Classical music is something that uh, uh, we have seen throughout history. I mean, many people call it in Hindi Shastriya Sangeet, thinking that it is connected to the Shastras or the religious treatises. But actually, this is something which has been questioned a lot. You know, how do we really take it back to the Shastras or the classical period? But nevertheless, it is a kind of a tradition which is sometimes you also call it art music, or something which is which finds patronage from from the elite of the society, mostly the kings and the nawabs and the the rajas of various places in India. So classical music in India is in general kind of divided into two geographic regions: the North Indian and the South Indian classical music. We have the South Indian music is also sometimes called Carnatic music, and the North Indian is known as the Hindustani music. Very few differences. Actually, the basis of both these systems is more or less the same kind of swaras, the same kind of notes, the ragas, the talas, maybe a little bit different. Some talas are different. The language of the compositions is different somewhat. But in general, the basic framework is more or less the same. Of course, uh, the approach may be different in some ways, and also historically they have gone through different kind of trajectories. So coming to the Hindustani music, of course the word Hindustani itself is something that has been used very recently in the 20th century. Probably we don't know, it may have been known by various names. Some used to call it just Pakka Gana, Pakka Rag, or Rag Sangeet, and various other kinds of names that were given to it. Um, Now, although my presentation is about the 1947 partition, but I would like to take you back a little bit into the history of the times which are prior to the 1947. But I won't go too much, too far into the history. Like, I don't want to take you into the, like the Mughal period or something, but at least starting from the 19th century, mid 19th century, as to what was happening, because that is a very important time in the history of this classical music. We all know that classical music or Hindustani music is something that finds patronage from the elite of the society, the kings and the nawabs. And the Mughal period, the Mughal kings, they were the biggest patrons of this form. There were several, gavaiyas, several kinds of nayaks, and many types of singers that we hear from the Mughal, various Mughal sources. Even if you look at many Mughal, Mughal period actually had seen many kinds of source material where you find music, details about music. So let me start by 19th century, mid 19th century, because that's the time when the Mughal Empire is on the decline. It's almost coming down, so the musicians are not finding that kind of patronage. And with the fall of Bahadur Shah Zafar in Delhi, the Mughal court is almost totally gone. So, because Delhi was a big center of music patronage, so what happens to all these musicians who are available, who were there in Delhi? So many of these musicians go to smaller places, places like Lucknow or Rampur or Gwalior, and many other places where they find some patronage with the Nawabs and the local Rajas. That's why you find that a large number of musicians who may have had an origin in Delhi or around Delhi, they move to different places, even going to Hyderabad and so on, all these places. Now, until this point, we don't really hear about a word like gharana. Today we are all familiar with the words gharana. There are gharanas or schools, stylistic schools of music. The gharana is a stylistic school as well as a family tradition where the music repertoire is passed down the generation by oral education and transmission. But gharana is not always a family tradition. It's also a stylistic school where a certain repertoire is developed. So until about mid 19th century or late 19th century, we don't really hear the word gharana. The gharana is a very modern kind of a construct. In fact, if you read a music historian like Daniel Newman, he talks about the fact that the word gharana may have been conceptualized in mid 19th century, but it actually started being used in 20th century. Maybe before gharana, we have word like Vani or Vani, like Tagar Vani or some other kinds of Vanis. So we have, end of 19th century, many great musicians that we hear about today, they were sort of born. So we have people like Vishnu Narayan Bhatkhande, who was born in 1860. Then we have Alauddin Khan, Fayaz Khan, Kesar Bhai Kerkar, and then many when the recording started, when the gramophone recording started, then we had recordings of people like Mushtari Bai, Pyare Sahab, Kanan Bala, Fayaz Khan, Omkar Nath Thakur, Janki Bai. All these names you will find in some of the earliest recordings that were available. And these names became popular, because their recordings started being sold. So people could actually buy a recording, buy a small record, and hear them. Because before that, you had to go to a concert, you had to go to a program where you will, and most of these concerts were actually, because they were patronized by the kings or the nawabs or the rajas, so only select few people could be invited in those places. But it's only when the recordings were available, then anybody could buy those recordings and got a little bit a taste of what these singers were performing. But let me tell you that these recordings, most of the recordings, the early recordings that are available, they were small, recordings, like small vinyl, and they had like 3 to 4 minutes recording only. So even if they were singing something like a khayal or a thumri or a dadra bandish, it would be only 3 to 4 minute long. So from the recordings, we don't really know what how the longer pieces were being performed, and how the music was being performed even before the recordings were made. It's very difficult to know, even though we know from some of the books what sort of compositions were being sung. So people have written books in which they have transcribed the compositions. They have even they've given some kind of notation of these recordings, but we don't know how they were really being performed. So it's only when these recordings are available, then we get to know a little bit about how, what was being performed, and how the ordinary people could actually own these recordings. Now, as I mentioned, a very important name, Vishnu Narayan Bhatkhande. He comes from Maharashtra, and actually early 20th century saw a kind of a revival of classical music, especially coming from Maharashtra, because Maharashtra is a place where it had a tradition of not only music being performed on the stage, but also some kind of stage theater, where music mandalis and theater mandalis were performing in Maharashtra, and also at the border of Maharashtra and Karnataka, a place like Dharwad, they had a very rich tradition of music being performed on the stage. So we had somebody like Bhatkhande, and there's another name which is very important, and that is Vishnu Digambar Paluskar. These two people, both of them came from Maharashtra, and in a way, they tried to revive the Indian classical music, and revived in a very interesting way. Till this point of time, music performance, especially this kind of rag sangeet, was associated with kotha and tawayafs and a kind of courtesan culture. And most of the music which was performed on these tawayaf, or the courtesan places, was obviously romantic kind of compositions, which are talking about the beloved and the lover and so on, and very romantic, very amorous sort of compositions which were there. and a large number of people, this is a time when there is a revival, there is a kind of a reform movement happening in India, which sometimes is associated with the nationalistic reform and even a Hindu nationalistic reform. So by and large, people used to look down upon music because they thought that this kind of music is associated with the kothas and the tawayefs and the courtesans, and people of the high class, the high caste. They didn't really they didn't really want their children to be learning that kind of music. Now somehow the revival which happened in Maharashtra with this Paluskar and Bhatkande, they found, they tried to take the music away from this Shringar Ras kind of a mood. The Indian music has these rasas, or the moods, or the different kind of sort of emotional content. So there is a Shringar Ras, there are various kinds of rasas. There are almost 9 different moods that you can think of. So they tried to take the music from Shringar Rasa towards more Bhakti Rasa, or more devotional kind of a form, so that it can be more popular, and then it can go away from uh, this Kotha and Tawayef kind of culture. And and also Bhatkhande did something very revolutionary. What he did, he sat with all these ustads, or the gurus who had remembered all these music compositions. He sat with them, and he noted down their compositions. He noted down what they were singing, in what raga, what tala, and so on. And he tried to compose, he tried to write them down with notations. And so he almost compiled something which was never compiled in written form. It was all coming through oral tradition. He compiled them, and he made notes. He published some of these compilations in various books. So this was a revolutionary thing, and this kind of brought the music to a more documented form, and people started learning, and so on and so forth. So much so that in 1901, Paluskar goes to Lahore and starts the first music college in Lahore, which is called the Gandharv Mahavidyalaya. And now we know Gandharv Mahavidyalaya are available in many places, but the first Gandharv Mahavidyalaya was established in Lahore in 1901. Now, this is very interesting. I mean, somebody coming from Maharashtra and going all the way to Punjab, to Lahore, and establishing the first music college in Gandhar Mahavidyalaya. Why? Because Punjab was a very, very lively, Punjab had a lively culture of music. It had connoisseurs of music. It had much more like, I mean, obviously, Bhatkhande, Paluskar must have found Punjab as to be more viable a place to start a college like that. I mean, after 1901, when he started this, he comes back to Bombay in 1908, and he starts the same college, the branch of that college in Bombay. And then many branches were opened in other places. But this is very interesting to note that in Lahore, the first college of music is started. Now, then this goes on further, and this revival is kind of really taking shape. There are many other musicians who are coming up. Then about Paluskar, let me tell you a little piece of information. He sang this Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram with Gandhi on stage, and many other things. So in a way, there was a revivalism of music, not only toward taking it towards this bhakti or devotional form, but also connecting it to the Indian national movement. And if you read, there is a very recent book called Two Men in Music, written by Janaki Bakle, in which the scholar talks about this very fact, that how these two men, Paluskar and Bhatkande, tried to connect Indian classical music, tried to revive it according to the identity of the Hindu nationalism. And then there's a whole detail about it. You can read about that. Now, this is a time, there are many gharanas, as I was mentioning, that the gharana is something that is a modern construct. So many musicians start associating themselves to certain places. For example, there is the Kirana Gharana, there is the Patiala Gharana, there is Gwalior Gharana, and there is Rampur Sahaswan Gharana, where most of these musicians who came from these places. For instance, Abdul Karim Khan Sahab came from Kirana. He was born in 1872. His cousin was Abdul Wahid Khan Sahab, who spent a lot of time in Lahore teaching. And in Punjab, the kind of tradition of music that you had was very vigorous, very powerful. I mean, they used to sing in very loud kind of a way, whereas and also in a kind of a drut style, very fast tempo. Whereas Kirana was is this very slow and very slow kind of a tempo where they give emphasis on each swara. They expand it for some time. So when Abdul Wahid Khan Sahab comes to Lahore, he introduces this style of Kirana Gharana to Punjab, so that in Punjab so far there was this very vigorous, very loud, very uh, drut kind of style, and this Vilambit style is introduced in Punjab, and that really makes an impact in Punjab, and people start imbibing that kind of style. Then we have many other musicians like Bundu Khan, who was a sarangi player from Delhi. He was born in 1880, uh, and also Mamman Khan, also a sarangi player. Bundu Khan, he goes to Lahore and other places before 1947, but then at the time of partition in 1947, he decides to stay back in Delhi, even though his relatives go to Lahore. He didn't really want to go to Punjab, to Pakistan, but during partition, because his relatives remained there, and he finally said that, okay, I will go to Lahore and bring my relatives back to Delhi. He goes to Pakistan, and then something or the other happens, and he's kind of, he's asked to perform in here and there, and finally he gets stuck in Karachi, and he's not able to come back. So he finally remains in Punjab, in Pakistan. Bundu Khan was not only doing sarangi, but while playing the sarangi, he also used to sing. So there is a whole singing style which he carried, and his son Umrao Bundu Khan again was trained in sarangi playing as well as vocal music. So these are some of the musicians who were kind of migrating. As you all know, 1947 partition was a very dramatic, very violent kind of event which happened in South Asia. Large number of people, millions of people migrated on both sides of the border. Large number of people died, and so on. And interestingly, the musicians, I mean, of course, a lot of people went. There were all sorts of people. There were craftsmen, there were artists, there were musicians, there were literary people, there were poets, there were all kinds of people who were migrating on both sides of the border. And a lot of work has been done on the socio-political kind of situation and the violence and so on. A lot of research has been done, but very little work has been done on the impact of partition on music and arts. So I was looking at this topic, and I wanted to do some research, and in 2005 I got an opportunity to go to Pakistan and meet some of the people. It's already, I mean, 2005 is already too late. A lot of people have already are no more there, but still I was able to meet some of the famous musicians like Fateh Ali Khan Sahab of Patiala Gharana, Fateh Ali Khan and Amanat Ali Khan, the two brothers, and I was able to meet Ghulam Hasan Shaggan Sahab and so on. So, but this is obviously, as I said, it's a very late period. There are some important personalities of music who are affected by classical music, and the entire area is affected by classical music, the entire area of Punjab and Sindh and so on. So in Punjab, the most important gharana was, of course, Patiala gharana, but also there is the Kasur style, the Kasur gharana, So Bade Ghulam Ali Khan was born in Lahore in I think 1906, and he belonged to this Kasur Patiala kind of style. And his other ancestors were Fateh Ali Khan and Ali Bakhsh Khan and Ashik Ali and Amanat Ali Khan and all. So Bade Ghulam Ali Khan initially used to play sarangi. He used to accompany the vocalist, but very soon he started, doing the vocal also. He started singing. But Bade Ghulam Ali Khan is a rare person who, instead of, a large number of musicians went from India to Pakistan, but he was in Lahore and Kasur, and he decides to come to India. He decides to be an Indian citizen ultimately. Of course, till 1965, he was still going back and forth. He was not really decided, but I think the Indian government tried to persuade him to remain in India. So he came back to India and he stayed in Bombay and other places. Um, of course, when we talk about partition and the impact of it on music, we usually talk about Punjab and this side of the border. We hardly talk about, for example, Bangladesh or the Bengal side. And very honestly, I haven't done much research on that, but I know there are a large number of people from Bengal, from what is now Bangladesh or East Bengal, also came to India. For example, Pannalal Ghosh, who was born in 1911 around the area which is in Bangladesh, he came to India. And also, of course, we have the Alauddin Khan Sahab, who was born in that area in Bangladesh, which is in Bangladesh. But Alauddin Khan was not really, Baba Alauddin was not really affected by partition in that way, because he had already migrated to Calcutta and Rampur and Maihar, and he was already there. But he has his origin in the place which is in Bangladesh now. So many of these people are there, and then we have some people, some great musicians who were born in India but remained here. For example, Amir Khan Sahab was born in 1912 in Akola, and then he went to Indore and Mumbai, etc. Many other people from different places. So now, apart from the music, the classical music tradition, there is of course also the folk tradition or religious music tradition. We all know that Punjab is an area which is full of, Punjab and Sindh both are area which have very rich traditions of Sufi tradition and religious traditions. I mean, the most important one is the Sikh tradition. The Guru Nanak ji was born in Nankana Sahib, which is right now in Pakistan, and he grew up in a largely Muslim kind of a milieu, and he learned from the Sufis and so on. And one of his companions was Mardana ji, and Mardana Sahab played rubab. So there is a whole tradition of rababiyas or rabab players which were there in Punjab, in that part of Punjab which is now in Pakistan. Even in Lahore and other places, you will find many Muslim musicians who come from that tradition of rababis. The most famous one being Bhai Lal, who was in Punjab, and his son is Ghulam Hassan Shaggan. They are from that Rababi tradition, who used to do the Shabad and Kirtan in the Sikh tradition. So that's another very important kind of tradition which was affected by the partition in 1947, because large number of Sikhs migrated to India, but the Muslim musicians who were the Rababis, they remained mostly in Punjab, in Pakistan side, and you can still find them there. Of course, there are Rababis and Dadis and other kind of traditions available in Indian Punjab, but that is a very important kind of juncture, a very important kind of thing which was disrupted in a way by the partition. The gharanas which were affected by the 1947 partition, you have the Agra Gharana, Gwalior Gharana, Delhi Gharana, Jaipur Athroli Gharana, Kirana Gharana most importantly, Talwandi, Sham Chaurasi, and is another very important Gharana which is called the Qawwal Bache Gharana. Qawwal Bachche Gharana, they believe that it was there were two sort of qawwals or singers, brothers who in the in the 12th 13th century, and they were kind of maybe there, and they, children from them were taught by Hazrat Amir Khusro in 14th century, and that's how the Qawwal Bachche tradition started. And they used to do the qawwali, which, I mean, not exactly the today's qawwali, but a kind of a vocal music which was based on the compositions of that time. So this Qawwal Bachche tradition continued, and it had affected the Delhi Gharana as well as the Gwalior Gharana and many other Gharanas. Amongst the people who came to Pakistan after 1947 are Amanat Ali Fateh Ali Khan from Patiala, and there is Salamat Nazakat Ali from Sham Chaurasi Gharana. There is Roshanara Begum, who was, although she was born in 1917 in Calcutta, but she was from Kirana Gharana basically. And there is Sharif Khan Poochwale, who was born in 1926 in Pooch in Jammu. He was doing sitar and veena and all. So many of these people came, and they did their music. They continued their music. Now, let me also tell you, as I was mentioning, that the area which is now in Pakistan, Punjab and Sindh, apart from the classical music traditions, it is also very rich in the folk and Sufi music traditions. So I mentioned, of course, Guru Gobind Singh, but after that we have, sorry, Guru Nanak Ji. After that we have many Sufi singers after or before him also. I mean, you have Sheikh Fariduddin Ganj Shakar, who was from the Chishti Sufi tradition, and the Chishti Sufis were very much, they used to listen to music, they used to do the sama, and there must have been qawwals in his khanqa. Then after that, we have, till recently in the last few centuries, we have Baba Bulle Shah, we have Hazrat Waris Shah and Shah Hussain, and then in Sindh, of course, there are many other Sufis. There is Abdul Latif Bhitai and so on. And in the Sufi khaniqahs or the dargahs of all these Sufis, you will find a unique kind of music traditions, unique kind of singing tradition in all these Sufi dargahs. And there is also a kind of a you can't really say that they are only folk music or only Sufi music. There is a lot of gray area between what we call classical and the folk in all these places, because most of these people were doing the singing in the typical ragas and talas. For example, even Guru Granth Sahib has been, the sections of it there are specified that, it has to be performed in this particular raga and so on and so forth. So the music and the ragas and talas were very much part of all these traditions, whether the folk music or the the Sufi music. For example, in Sindh and Multan, you have something called the kafi. Now, kafi is not just a raga or thaat. I mean, of course, in classical music, we know that kafi is a rag and thaat, but it's also a kind of a genre or song type, which is very much popular in that area in Pakistan. So the entire area, this entire region, the undivided Punjab, and the undivided Rajasthan, the undivided Sindh, and all these regions, they were full of music traditions before 1947. And there has been a disruption in 1947, but that disruption was, I would say, I mean, according to my kind of study, I would say that it was a temporary disruption, because the music remains in the hearts of the people. And let me quote one very interesting sentence that I found, and this is by none other than Amir Khan Sahab. He said somewhere that, उर्दू में मैं बताऊंगा, he said कि ऐसा नहीं है कि 4 सुर भारत में रह गए और 3 सुर पाकिस्तान में चले गए. आर्ट या विद्या को उस तरह से बांटा नहीं जा सकता जैसे आप प्रॉपर्टी को बांटते हैं. So basically saying that the partition did not mean that the 4 sur or 4 notes were remained in India and 3 went away to Pakistan. It's not like that. Art cannot be divided like a property, like you divide property. So it's a very interesting, statement that he made, that the art remains in the hearts of the people. You cannot really divide. So even today, despite the partition, despite this division, despite the border, the art remains there. The same ragas, the same talas, the same swaras, it's still there. Of course, the socio-political situation creates, problems for us. And when these musicians came to Pakistan, a large number of musicians from India, when they came to Pakistan, for them there was a big challenge, because a large number of connoisseurs of music, a large number of audiences, let's say the Hindu and the Sikh audiences, they came the other way around. They came to India. So there was a void created. I'm not saying that the Muslim music, there were no Muslim connoisseurs or audiences. Of course, there were. I mean, Lahore was a great place where almost every house would have a baithak, or a little concert where people would be singing. I mean, if you look at all the musicians that I named you, those who were born in end of 19th century and who were popular around 1940s, every one of them performed in Lahore. And in Lahore, there was in the old Lahore, there was a place, there was an area called Mochi Darwaza, in which there is a small kind of a shrine, or a place where they used to come, and they would participate, they would sing, there would be food, and there were great kind of a culture. And any great musician who did not perform at Mochi Darwaza or in Lahore was not really considered a great musician. This was the understanding. So all the musicians from Calcutta, from Bombay, Delhi, everywhere, they used to go and perform in Lahore. So and it continued in a way. I mean, when I went in 2005, of course, I went there with a very different kind of an image. Outside Pakistan, most people think that Pakistan is not really a place where you will find arts and culture and so on. So they would they would wonder what is Pakistan, the way the media has portrayed the image of Pakistan with this kind of extremism and so on. So when you actually go there, you realize that rich music and rich arts and culture are thriving there. Of course, there may be some limitations. I mean, if you look at the history of post 1947, you will find that these musicians went through difficult times. They had very little audience. The one of the only places which supported or patronized the music was, for example, Radio Pakistan. So the radio stations like Lahore, Rawalpindi, and Karachi, and all these places, they had a rich tradition. They used to broadcast classical music. So at least the musicians could go to these radio stations. There were also small baithaks. There were also some patrons who used to hold music concerts almost every month. In there are several places in Lahore. So at least there was some patronage, but still not in that popular sense. So what happened was then that people started, performing less because they were getting not much support. And also there were big concern. There was another very big issue that when Pakistan is created, of course, the partition happened due to this one very important theory, which is called the two nation theory. Imagining that Hindus and Muslims are two different cultures, two different communities who cannot live together, and so on. Somebody presented this theory. I mean, it's not even true that only Muhammad Ali Jinnah Sahab presented this theory. Some say that even Savarkar and the people from the kind of right-wing Hindu ideology, they also presented this theory that Hindus and Muslims probably cannot live together, and there should be two different states. So the theory has come from a long ago, and so because Pakistan was created supposedly with this theory, so they started imagining that now that we have formed this Islamic republic, a kind of an Islamic country of Pakistan, so we should our culture and our national identity should also be Islamic, and it should not have those old cultural traditions which were associated with a different religion. So there was a kind of a, pure a kind of a sanitization of culture in Pakistan for some time. A lot of people thought that what is this classical music? This reminds us of the old past, of the Hindu past, and so on. So some people even said that either you should not perform this music, or if you perform the music, then you should not take names like Hindu gods and goddesses. So if there were raga names which had Hindu gods and goddesses, they were renamed or they were banned and things like that. This happened for some time, I guess, not forever. So this continued. As a result, a lot of musicians felt that now they can't really perform those older traditions, those older compositions, or things like khayal and Drupad and so on, which reminded people of the older past. So this happened for some time, and as a result, what happened was that, I mean, they had to finally survive. The musicians had to survive. In order to survive, they had to think of ways, and so they started kind of adapting their music to suit their new audiences, to kind of Islamize the music in a way, or maybe not use that word, to kind of uh, take it into an identity which would be more acceptable in Pakistan. So, for instance, in the place of Drupad and Khayal and Tumri, other forms like the Tarana, no, sorry, not Tarana, Ghazal Gaiki and the qawwali, they became more popular. They became more acceptable forms because people thought that ghazal and qawwali is something which is closer to our culture and something that we should sing. And as a result, these two forms, qawwali and ghazal, they developed further, and a lot of great musicians performed qawwali. So we have great qawwals like I mean, today, of course, we have today's musicians. I'm not talking about today's qawwals, but if you go back a little bit in the past, you will find, of course, in ghazal we have great musicians like Barkat Ali Khan Sahab, again from the same Patiala Kasur tradition. He was a great ghazal singer, ghazal thumri, and you will find similarities of Barkat Ali Khan with Begum Akhtar, for example. Then we have Mehdi Hassan Saab and Ghulam Ali Saab. Mehdi Hassan really took the ghazal gaiki to a new height because he was trained in classical music. He knew the ragas and talas, so he would compose ghazals in specific ragas and talas, and when he sang, he would actually explain what is the raga that he's singing. So that way, he tried to give some knowledge of the classical music through the ghazal gaiki, and that's how the ghazal gaiki became much more developed and much more popular, and many more people started copying his style. And in Qawwali, there were great Qawwals like Qutbuddin, Bahauddin Qawwal. Then you have Munshi Raziuddin Sahab and Manzoor Niazi Sahab. These are all, older Qawwals, who were very much popular in 50s and 60s in Pakistan. Much later came, of course, Sabri brothers and Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. They are like more recent, and then of course, further people. But these qawwals really took their music to a height where which probably you may not find in place like India. Of course, in India, qawwali and ghazal have a very different kind of a trajectory. But I think the division, this partition did help ghazal and qawwali develop further in Pakistan. So these were some of the interesting kind of developments which have taken place. Another thing which happened was that some of the children of the classical musicians, they were wondering that the many of the ustads, many of the great maestros, they were wondering that whether we should really teach our children this classical music in Pakistan, because there is no future. I mean, if I teach my child this music, who will they perform for? They don't have the audience, so what to do? So they allowed their children, they allowed their people to kind of learn maybe popular music, some popular forms, folk forms. So there was a lot of experimentation which happened in Pakistan. experimentation of amalgamating various things. There were people who were kind of mixing ragas, mixing different kind of swaras, something which would not happen in India. You know, in India, and this is a difference that I find when comparing the two traditions after 1947. That in India there is an emphasis on this pure raga and purity of the music, and somehow associating it with the religion or religious identity. So they feel that because we call it Shastriya Sangeet, because it's related to the Shastras and the Vedic period and so on and so forth, so we have to keep it pure. We cannot amalgamate, we cannot put things together. So there was a lot of emphasis in India on the purity of swaras and ragas and so on. Whereas in Pakistan, because they had to survive, because they had to find audiences, so they were ready to experiment, they were ready to mix things. So that's what they did. There is this folk singer Niazi Sahab, who was there in Punjab. He also did a lot of experimentation. He mixed, he would, like, in one performance he would mix 2-3 different ragas, or swaras from 2-4 or 5 different ragas, and then perform. And he felt, and I think it's true, that he felt that he was popularizing that music more, and he managed to do that, and many other people copied that. So this happened, and then, as I said, that the children of these of these classical singers, they experimented, they started doing popular music, they started doing pop kind of music. So that way I would say that even the pop music, and when I say pop music, I would say, it's not a fixed category. It can be many things, because in Pakistan there was hardly any. There were not that great cinema music industry as it was in India, for instance. So, but you still need some popular music. So there's a lot of independent popular kind of groups which started in Pakistan, and much before they started in India. So you have pop music. You even have the mixing of kind of fusion of Western music with traditional music happening much before in Pakistan, much before India. But the interesting part is that even in that pop music, there is an element of classical, there is an element of traditional music very much there. So what they are doing is that they are kind of they're coming from the tradition of classical training, but they are performing popular music in Pakistan, and in a way trying to keep the tradition alive through the modern instruments like guitar and drum kit, and all the modern instruments, which something that not happened in India. In India, of course, pop music is a much later tradition. Of course, there is a very robust tradition of film music in India, which was not so much in Pakistan. But the pop music is a much, I would say, not a very robust tradition in India. And the result of that, if I bring it to the modern day example, the result of that is, for example, if you've seen the Coke Studio music, the Coke Studio of Pakistan, I felt, it's my personal opinion, is much more richer and much more sturdy, it has a depth in it which you will probably not find so much in many of the songs that were created by the Coke Studio in India. I'm not giving any value judgment about this, but I'm just giving a very personal kind of an opinion on that. So, and the reason for that is that there is a very rich tradition of classical training, even amongst the popular singers in Pakistan. So this is a kind of a very interesting journey that you can see, which happened in this entire region through music. Some of it, of course, is there is a lot of loss of tradition. There is a lot of loss which happened because of the music, because of the partition. But there is also a lot of gain. I would say that in by and large, there is this emphasis in India on pure kind of thing, purity of tradition, has kept the classical music tradition amongst the elite. uh, it's one of the reasons why classical music could not be popularized as much as it should have been, because we emphasized too much on purity and keeping things pure. Whereas in Pakistan, because there was not that much emphasis and people were ready to do experiment, so it was allowed to be, to become a part of the popular culture, a part of the, people's culture. And that is why somebody told me in Lahore that when they organize these baithaks, the smaller concerts, the baithaks are not organized by some elite intellectuals. Rather, they are organized by the fruit seller, the fruit mandi, some kind of fruit seller and meat seller, and the hotel owner, and this, really businessmen and people who are from the market and from the really, ordinary people who can uh, support a music like that. So that's something that very you will find not that strongly probably in North India, maybe in a place like Banaras or in Calcutta or in Maharashtra, in Pune, Bombay. But in the rest of India, I find that classical music is still a very elite kind of a music, and despite a lot of state support in India, the condition of Pakistan, condition of classical music is not really all that great. I mean, there are very few patrons of music. If there was no state patronage, then classical music would not have survived. So these are some of the differences that one has found. Again, my study or my kind of whatever observations that I've made today are very personal observations. It's a work in progress. I've been doing this work. I made this film Khayal Darpan, trying to explore this thing. Lot of work needs to be done. Lot of work needs to be done, especially about tracing the trajectory of every gharana. Who from which gharana went to Pakistan, or came from Pakistan to India, and what they did and how they performed, and what were the socio-political conditions which affected them, whether they did well or whether they did bad, or all these things need to be studied in much more detail. I just began this kind of research. Of course, there are some work, there is some studies that are available. I mean, I found a lot of books in Pakistan, and there's one very interesting thing that I found, that in Pakistan, it is not only performance, but also there is a scholarship of music in Pakistan. I mean, one doesn't associate in generally people have very different opinions about Pakistan outside the country. But I found this scholarship. I found a whole lot of books that have been written about music in Urdu in Pakistan. So when I came back after doing my research, I brought a whole lot of like 2 cartons full of Urdu books on music from Pakistan. And these are very interesting books. Some of them are, of course, kind of books that musicians have written. They're just tried to compile. They've just tried to document their compositions, notation and so on, and a little bit history of what their gharana has been doing. But then some books are actually almost musicologists have written these books. I mean, I found some great musicologists in Pakistan, people like Rashid Malik Sahab and Saeed Malik Sahab, and many other people, who have written, who have done documentation, and they have gone into the theory of music, the musicology, and they have written great works. There's a lot of documentation that has been done. One should also say that in Pakistan, I found, because of this partition, because of the people migrating from the Indian side, there is a sense of nostalgia which they carried, of course. And when they reached there, they tried to hang on to that nostalgia, tried to, cling on to that nostalgia by keeping recordings, by keeping books and all those sort of things. So there is one I mean, there are some interesting archives of music recordings I found in Pakistan. For example, there's one fabulous archive, probably one of the rare archive in Karachi, which is that of Lutfullah Khan Sahab. Lutfullah Khan was born in Madras in Chennai in 1920s, and he was great with music. He was a performer also, but more of a documentation person, and also a recordist. So from Karachi, from Chennai, Madras, he comes to Hyderabad, then from there to Bombay, and from Bombay, finally in 1947, he comes to Karachi, and he became a Pakistani. But he was one of the rare persons who was recording things in 1940s. He had got these recording equipments, and he made amazing amount of recordings of not only musicians but also poets and writers and all kinds of, people reading poetry and people doing performances. So he has all these recordings. I mean, hundreds and thousands of hours of recordings. And something like that, I don't think, you may find some institution in India which have such recordings, but local people, personal archives is very rare to find something like that. Also, I found Raza Kazim Sahab in Lahore, who had a similar kind of recording archive, and many others. I mean, there are many others who have these kind of recordings. So I'm going to end now because I think I've run out of time, and I would like people to ask questions if they have. This was a very random journey from my side, so I thank you for listening to it, and now the questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Yusuf, for this fascinating talk. Like, there was so we during the time you were speaking, we did get a few questions. So let me start by kind of going through them. There have been questions, there have been comments, and I would like ask the people to keep writing your questions in the chat box. So let me begin. So the first uh, comment came from someone called, I don't know his name. The title here is showing Galaxy 18. Um, so he says that I have a feeling that Hazrat Amir Khosrow, who was in the Sultanate era, did a lot for some musical instruments as well as language, Dehlavi and Urdu.
Yes, yeah, I'm on. Tell me.
Yeah. Yeah, so this was his comment. So would you like to
Yeah.
say anything? So Shail replied to
Uh,
it saying like, yeah, good.
Yeah, the topic of Hazrat Amir Khusro is a huge topic, and I didn't go into it because I wanted to focus mostly on 19th and 20th century. A lot of people, in fact, the research that I did in Pakistan, the kind of apart from this Khayal Darpan, my topic was really Amir Khusro, and I wanted to find out. So yeah, I mean, musicians have a lot of claims about Hazrat Amir Khusro, that he invented a lot of things like sitar and tabla and many forms like khayal and tarana and qalbana and khol, etc. Many other things. I don't want to contest all those claims, because some of the gharana musicians, they take it very personally and they get very emotional if somebody contests that. But yes, if you look at the Persian works of Amir Khusro, the more authentic comments from there, you know that Amir Khusro Sahab was very much into music. He was a he himself says that I know the Persian music, I know the instruments, I know how to tune the instruments. You see, his role, Amir Khusro's role in Delhi Sultanate in the 14th century was that he was associated with the courts of about 7, 8 different kings as a chronicler. He was writing the chronicles for them, but at the same time, he was also often doing he was arranging kind of an evening entertainment, you can say, for the king. So during the era of a king called Kaikobad in Delhi, he was composing a new ghazal every day in Persian, and also setting it to music, and then getting the musicians to perform it and rehearse it, and then that music would be performed before the king in the evening. And this was every day he was doing. So, which means that Amir Khusro knew music, and he was training people, he was giving them instructions. He also knew the instruments, and very often the kings would ask him to compose something which is a Persian ghazal, but sung in an Indian music style. So, which means that he also has to know the Indian music style. So he was doing all this. He knew Indian music. He knew the Persian or Central Asian music. He was he was a great composer. But of course, his music compositions have not come to us by a written form as his other historical works have come. So, but definitely it's a great contribution to music field, and most of the musicians consider him as guru. Whenever they give his name comes in a composition, they would touch their earlobe in kind of respect to him. So that's his tradition.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. So this is by Sham Pathak. So he's asking, are the origins of North Indian and South Indian classical music different? And if so, what is the meeting point or common thread? Even this has been partially addressed in the thread by Sharif Awan, but
Uh-huh.
if you would like to comment.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you see, I'm not really a musicologist or music historian, especially of the ancient period. So very difficult for me to say something like that. But there is a theory that, you know, uh, you see, the culture of North and South is very different. We all know the languages are different, the food is different, everything is different. But there is some central thing which connects these. I mean, there is the board. Geographically, there is the Vindhyachal which separates North and South. But as far as the Hindustani and Carnatic music is concerned, they're very similar also in many ways. The same swaras, the same kind of the same kind of talas. Also, there are some talas which are different. So I am sure there was some give and take, some kind of back and forth kind of flow of culture which was happening between North and South, which makes them similar, but at the same time different in some ways. And let me also tell you that the classical music is a very elite form. It's a very Brahmanical form. So, for example, Sanskrit is a central thing, a central kind of symbol between North and South, and that kind of connects many things. Then, if you read some of the history, you will also find a theory that when the Turks came from Central Asia into India, when this Islamic kind of invasion, so-called invasion, happened. So a large number of people from North India migrated, escaped towards South India. Even somebody like the the some of the music treatises like the Natya Shastra, which was written. The person who wrote the Natya Shastra, he also kind of migrated from Kashmir or wherever he was towards South, and so in a way saying that the South India carried the more purer tradition, whereas the North India was affected by this Turkish or Central Asian tradition. I mean, it's a theory, it's a conjecture. I don't know. I can't really say that. But because I mean, even South Indian music is affected by Central Asian forms in some ways. You can't say that it's totally cut off from there. So there are some roots which are similar, I would say. But yeah, of
Yeah.
course, you can read a lot of theory, a lot of history on this. I'm not an expert on that.
Yeah. So if I, in fact, if I'm allowed to comment, like the shape of the
Yeah,
Saraswati Veena itself is a shape that comes from, it's a lute shape that comes from Central Asia. Because if you look at old murals,
yeah,
our
yeah,
shapes are all Rudra Veena or like Ektantri, like single
yeah.
stick with a big
That's
hand
true.
resonator. So Saraswati Veena
That's
itself
true.
is instrument whose shape itself comes from the Middle East. So,
Yes, that's true. That's true.
uh,
So,
by the way, you're talking about Sangit Ratnakar, right? Not Natya Shastra in this comment, which they
oh,
migrated
sorry.
from.
Yeah, in a way, I mean, yeah, you can say. I mean, there are theories about both these.
Okay.
Yeah, Sharang Dev. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah. There was somewhere I read that Sharandev kind of migrated to South India, escaping from all these Mongol or Turkish. But it's a
Yeah.
theory. Yeah.
So next is a comment by Shantanu Maji. He adds, like, when we were saying, like, the border between India and Bangladesh is like is also something that needs requires study, and you mentioned a few musicians. So he adds, like, the name of Tarapada Chakraborty, so who's
Yeah.
to the list. I would also, I think, add like a migration into Bangladesh. If I'm not wrong, Waliullah Khan, the sitar player, I think he migrated to Bangladesh because
Uh-huh.
some of his recordings are now with the Dhaka radio. If I'm not wrong, I may be mistaken here.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah,
now,
that's an
so
area actually. I haven't done much work on this Bengal side, but somebody needs to work on that.
yeah. So before I mention the next question, I would like to like say that, like, amongst our audience we have the next question is from Ranjani Ramachandran. So she's a very famous musician. So thank you, Ranjani ma'am, for being here with us. So, and she asks, what is the status of women classical musicians in Pakistan post partition, and specifically, did Roshnara Begum train in disciples?
Yeah. Actually, there were really a large number of women singers in Pakistan who were from the local region, as well as those who migrated from Indian side. The most famous one being, of course, Roshanara Begum from the Kirana Gharana, and there are many others. And Radio Pakistan continued broadcasting their performances continuously. um, and The interesting part is that, as I said, that many of them shifted to more semi classical forms like the thumri and the ghazal and the local forms. So, and that's how the ghazal gaiki also, you have Iqbal Bano and many other singers who started doing the more light music, or lighter classical music forms. So I think they thrived a lot. I mean, they were performing in many places. They were invited in concerts and so on. In fact, somebody recently, I heard that somebody is doing a documentary on the women singers of Pakistan. So maybe you will get to hear something like that. Um, so definitely, I mean, the women singers were quite. If you look at, see my film Khayal Darpan, they talk about one musician, Badruz Zama Sahab. He talks about the women singers and how their performances were still going on in radio. And I mean, many women singers recordings were popular in India. In fact, we hear of all these Iqbal Banu and other singers, Farida Khanum, for example, and many others. And of course, now there are many other modern ones. You see, Ghazal Gaiki went through a huge development in Pakistan, and that became quite popular in India. So those recordings were available in India. Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, you can go on to the next.
Yeah. So the next question is by Nandini Bhattacharya. So she's asking, how did the state of Pakistan and its evolution towards more religious bigotry had affected the forms of music? This is one question. There's another question from her. Um, how did the films in Pakistan, enriched by this age-old musical tradition, especially by the female vocalists? Uh, we know that there must have been, we have seen Salma Agha or Nazia Hassan at one time, not very long ago.
Hmm.
So this is the question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The state of Pakistan. You see, there has been different attitudes the state or the government has had. Initially, of course, there was development of, as I said, that there were some people who tried to cleanse the music tradition or the cultural tradition of Pakistan by saying that, certain ragas or certain names, or certain compositions which are using, let's say, Hindu mythology names, etc., will not be performed. So there was a time which happened, but then people were also very clever. Some of them did not sing those ragas or those compositions, but some of them changed the name. I mean, as you can see in my film Khayal Darpan, and so they continued performing. I don't think there was a very strict kind of banning of music or something like that. Things continued, but you know, between India and Pakistan, there have been these wars. If you are familiar with the history, there is 1965 war, there's 1971 war. Now, all these wars also affected the music tradition in a way, in the sense that, when a war happens between those two, between two countries, there is always this patriotism and jingoism. So there were a lot of these patriotic songs in Pakistan in 1965 and 1971, where they use the music for to enhance this patriotic or jingoistic kind of feeling. And somehow it was felt that the music which is from a certain tradition, let's say carrying a Hindu tradition, should not be used, because we are having this war and India is bad and India is saying Pakistan is bad and so on. So in a way, these wars also affected the music tradition at some level. So there has been ups and downs during all this time, but the biggest down, or biggest kind of dark age, I would say, of Pakistan was not during the war, but it was during the time when we have the General Ziaul Haq's period, when it was like a very dark period for music and arts and so on. Many of the musicians, many of the liberal art people, they kind of went underground. They could not participate. So that dark period, when it gets over, then suddenly people start kind of waking up. And I mean, this is something that was told to me by many musicians, many people in Pakistan. They said that now we are kind of waking up from a dark period, from a slumber, and we are finding. And in a way, this new revival now, like in the 1990s and so on, this new revival does not have those kind of prejudices which were there earlier, like non not using Hindu names and so on. So now this new revival is without the prejudices, and it's kind of invoking your old past, kind of digging your roots and finding your roots. So that is something new that has happened, and I find that very, very promising.
So
Her other question was regarding the
film music,
film.
film music.
Uh, Again, I have not done much study of the films. Um, but yeah, I mean, of course, you see, many musicians, many vocalists have sung for movies in Pakistan. Salma Agha is, of course, much recent one, but if you go back, there are even song singers who were earlier performing in India, and then they shifted to Pakistan and they started performing there. So there is definitely a very rich tradition there. I won't say much about Hindi, about this, sorry, the film music tradition. Yeah, you can. You want to go to the next question?
Okay, so the next question is by Shikha, and she's asking, who is the Indian elite today, and what culture does it value?
Well, elite is the elite which does the patronage of classical music. And elite is basically people. You see, classical music listening to it or performing it, it needs a lot of time. It needs a lot of uh, you need to inculcate a kind of a listening culture. You need to know the nuances of music, and only somebody who has a lot of time and who could sit at ease and listen to the music. And I'm not saying that the ordinary people, the lower middle class people don't have that kind of time. Of course, they also have time. They also have a lot of leisure time and they listen to a lot of music. But somehow the nuances which are needed, they have been kept in a way to a certain class of people. I'm not saying that they cannot be appreciated by others. They can be appreciated, but they have been kept somehow. It's been kept in a very Brahminical way. I mean, we all know how the Brahmanism works in India and South Asia. This whole caste thing, and ultimately, Indian classical music is a very caste-based thing. If you go, maybe some people will say that some of the shastras were not even taught to the lower, people of the lower caste and so on. So all those traditions are there. So, and today's elites are again educated intellectuals who listen to this kind of music, who go to the concerts. But I'm not saying that this music can only be appreciated by them. It can be appreciated by others if it is available. For example, if it is part of our education system. I mean, unfortunately, even in India, it's not part of the education system. When we had a experiment of the Speak Meke, which tried to popularize music, it was a movement which popularized it. But even now, if you ask the Speak Meke people, they say that very few people are coming to listen to classical music. So it has been on the decline, not because it can't be understood or it can't be appreciated. I think it can be appreciated. It only needs to be part of our education system, I think.
So the next question. So we have quite a few more questions. So let me quickly go over them. Okay. So
Yeah,
next,
let's quickly
yeah. Mm. So next question is by Shantanu Manji. So he's asking, in this era of social networking and popular mass media, do you see any trend of reciprocity and mutual influence among performers of Khayal between India and Pakistan in terms of style, delivery, or repertoire?
yeah Any trend of reciprocity, actually, the problem is that the musicians on both sides of the border, and even the ordinary people on both sides of the border, are dying to meet each other. If you look at my film Khayal Darpan, you will see that these musicians from Lahore, Badruzzama Sahab, he says that, and he's in a very emotional way, almost crying. He says that I'm sitting here on this side of the border and they are sitting on that side of the border. We can't meet. So I'm sure the musicians want to meet, they want to interact, they want to learn from each other. In fact, they would like to, they would like to perform on the other side of the border. They come, sometimes they come, but obviously not everybody can come. Only the famous people can go on both sides of the border. So I'm sure they are dying to meet people. They're dying to come. I mean, there are many musicians I met in Pakistan who said that, oh, I want to shift to India, can you help me migrate to India? Those kind of things. So there are people, they're wanting to meet each other, they're wanting to listen to each other's performances. But unfortunately, there is very little which has happened in real life. I mean, I would have liked to see some sort of jugalbandi or some sort of collaborations between the musicians of both sides to take place, which could evolve something new, which could give something new. But there are hardly any examples of that. Maybe, Bombay film industry, of course, gives opportunity of that to people. Like all these singers from Pakistan come to India and they perform, and Rahat Fateh Ali Khan and all these people. So that's a different ball game. But in terms of the classical singers, I'm not sure if there are any jugal bandis or any kind of because for this kind of an endeavor, you need patrons, you need some patronage. And who will give the patronage? The Pakistani side, the Pakistani government will probably not support a collaboration between India and Pakistan. And same thing in India, the Indian government will not support a collaboration. Maybe, I heard one very interesting collaboration which happened, that Indian embassies in many countries last year, and I think on 15th August or 26th January, they asked performers in many countries to sing the national anthem and so on. So that, even from Pakistan, somebody sang that, the Indian national. So I mean, that kind of collaboration has happened. For instance, Indians and Pakistanis singing each other's national anthem or some other national songs. That kind of collaboration has happened, but that's a very popular thing. But in terms of a very serious effort of collaborating musically, I'm not sure if I remember anything like that.
So Sharif Aman points out that he recorded a Jugalbandi between Pandit Vishwamohan Bhatt and Ustad Fateh Ali Khan of Gwalior. So this is not like the
Yes,
Patiala
yes, yes.
Fateh Ali Khan. So it was in
Yeah, yes, yes, I
2012.
remember. I remember that Sharif Sahab has done. Actually, Sharif Sahab has done amazing work of recording and promoting classical music in Pakistan. He was like one of my hosts in Karachi, and he helped me a lot in recordings and meeting people and so on. So I'm really grateful to him, and I'm so happy that he's here listening to this conversation. I know, my study of this whole topic is very cursory and very, very superficial, and he's really, he knows the inside story of all these things. So I know he's been collaborating, and he's released a lot of music recordings in kind of packaged form. So maybe he can talk about that sometime when we get the opportunity. So it's really good to see him here.
And the next question is also from him.
Yeah.
So he says, like, I have a question regarding the secular nature of our art music, while the religious version brings in mediocrity, be it Sikh, Christian music, or Muslim qawwali. Is it safe to say it that it is spiritual and emotional rather than being religious? This is his question.
Sorry, can you just repeat that last sentence?
Maybe if I ask him, like he can himself ask the question, that would be.
Yeah, Sharif Saab, if you would like to
Sharif sir, like you
speak
can
on the
come.
microphone.
जी यूसुफ सईद साहब और मनोज भाई,
Please.
थैंक यू। आप कैसे हैं? बहुत ही अच्छा लगा। और मैं
Ji.
नहीं चाहता कि मेरे सवालों को ज़्यादा टाइम दिया जाए, सो आई विल जस्ट गिव अ क्रक्स ऑफ व्हाट आई आस्क्ड। मेरा कहने का मतलब ये था यूसुफ भाई कि
Ji.
जो ये जिस क्लासिकल म्यूजिक की बात कर रहे हैं ना, वो जो आर्ट म्यूजिक, खुद लफ्ज आपने इस्तेमाल किया, तो दिस आर्ट
Ji.
म्यूजिक हैज डेवलप्ड सिंस सेंचुरीज, वी नो दैट। और उसकी
Ji.
जो एक क्वालिटी थी हमेशा के लिए, स्पेशली मुस्लिम्स का जो कंट्रीब्यूशन था वो यही था कि दे
Ji.
ब्रॉट इन कन्फ्लुएंस इन शेप ऑफ सेकुलर आर्ट फॉर्म्स। तो जो
Uh-huh.
सेकुलर हो जाता है तो वो उसकी क्रिएटिविटी बढ़ जाती है। ऑल
Ji.
अदर रिलीजियस म्यूजिक्स इंक्लूडिंग मुस्लिम्स एंड सिख म्यूजिक एंड ऑल दैट, ये सारा मैं इसलिए नोट करते हैं कि ये मतलब मीडियोकर उस सेंस में नहीं है कि आप, मैं उसको अंडरमाइन नहीं कर रहा हूँ। द ओनली थिंग इज दैट आई वांटेड टू आस्क कि क्या ये, इज इट सेफ टू से कि जी ये रिलीजियस नहीं है? ये जो हमारा राग म्यूजिक है इंडिया और पाकिस्तान का पूरा साउथ एशियन, इट इज मोर
Ji.
स्पिरिचुअल एंड मोर इमोशनल। जब हम
Ji.
इसको
Ji.
उस हवाले से देखेंगे तो ज्यादा खूबसूरत होगा। और उसकी क्रिएटिविटी जो दुनिया में हम क्लेम करते हैं कि दिस
Hmm.
इज डिफरेंट एंड इट्स सुपीरियर आर्ट फॉर्म। इतनी सी बात थी। आई
Hmm.
होप यू एग्री विद दिस।
नहीं, बिल्कुल सही। आपने बिल्कुल सही कहा। ये एक्चुअली बहुत अच्छा पॉइंट आपने रेज किया, और मैं ये कहना भी चाहता था कि एक तरह से हम लोगों ने दोनों कंट्रीज में बहुत से म्यूजिशियंस ने भी और बहुत से कमेंटेटर्स ने भी इसको रिलीजन या रिलीजियस आइडेंटिटी के साथ या स्पिरिचुअलिज्म के साथ जोड़ने की कोशिश की, क्योंकि वहाँ एक नेशनलिज्म, नेशनल आइडेंटिटी का सवाल आ रहा था कि हमें ये हमारे देश का या हमारे कंट्री का रिच ट्रेडिशन है, तो और क्योंकि कंट्री का एक रिलीजन के साथ एसोसिएशन है, सो वी नीड टू टेक इट टुवर्ड्स दैट. बट यू आर राइट दैट एक्चुअली दिस म्यूजिक ट्रेडिशन evolved because of being secular, because of being the emotions were not exactly devotional. They were, as I said, कि इंडियन साउथ एशियन म्यूजिक का जो राग जो जो रस है, रस थियोरी का यही है कि उसमें बहुत सारे रस हैं, और भक्ति तो एक एक रस है उसमें से, बल्कि भक्ति भी
बिल्कुल
शायद बाद में ऐड किया गया है. बाकी सारे जो रस हैं, जो जो थिएटर की भी जो ट्रेडिशन थी, उसमें ये सारे रस आते थे, कि उसमें डरावना भी एक रस है, भयानक रस है, और उसमें हास्य रस है, हंसी का है, और श्रृंगार तो है ही, और भी बहुत सारे हैं. हैरत यानी टू बी सरप्राइज्ड इज आल्सो अ रस. तो ये सारे रस थे, और ये एक एंटरटेनमेंट के फॉर्म्स थे.
हाँ, so
रिलीजन
it's
या
all about
भक्ति वाज
emotions.
नॉट. हाँ, दे वर ऑल डिफरेंट इमोशंस, और उसी से ये इवॉल्व हुआ है ये ट्रेडिशन. आई थिंक इट हैज बीन मेड into this devotional thing very recently, I would say. I mean, वो तो था, चलता आ रहा था पहले भी, डिवोशनल म्यूजिक जरूर होगा, ऐसा नहीं है कि नहीं था. सेक्युलर म्यूजिक के साथ डिवोशनल म्यूजिक भी था, लेकिन अब उसको शायद ज्यादा वो दिया जा रहा है. यहाँ तक कि इंडिया में तो ये हो गया है कि लड़कियां गाना सीखती हैं, और जब उनकी शादी का रिश्ता आता है तो पूछते हैं कि अरे इसने संगीत सीखा है या नहीं, या गाना या नाच सीखा है या नहीं. तो वो दैट बिकम्स दैट शी इज मोर पायस एंड मोर डिवोशनल, those kind of things. It has
तो
been converted into
इस बात
that.
की तो हम लोग अपने यहाँ इस बात की मिसाल देते हैं, जब
जी.
हम इस ये ट्रेडिशन जो है कि ये बच्चियों को आर्ट्स की तालीम होनी चाहिए एज अ प्री रिक्विजिट फॉर देयर मैरिज, तो ये तो हम
Yes.
बहुत तारीफ और उसके कमेंडेशन की शक्ल में हम यहाँ इस बात का जिक्र किया करते हैं अपनी तरफ से.
हाँ, बिल्कुल बिल्कुल. नहीं, वो तो ठीक है, लेकिन ये कि उसको एक रिलीजन के साथ जोड़ते हुए करना, कि ये गाना जानती है इसलिए ज्यादा अच्छी. हमारे यहाँ इंडिया में एक वर्ड है, संस्कारी है. संस्कारी मतलब बहुत ज्यादा ट्रेडिशनल है, बहुत ही कल्चरल है. तो वो उसको, संस्कार को भी वो एक रिलीजन से जोड़ने की कोशिश करते हैं, which should not be there. I mean, music should be learned for its secular values rather than religious values.
बहुत अच्छा, थैंक यू.
Thank you.
So we have two more questions as far as I can see. So let's go ahead with
Yeah.
them. So next one is a bit long. So it's from Shuddha
Uh-huh.
Shoddo. So he's writing. So hello, it was a very interesting insight into partition and Hindustani classical music. Listening to it, something came to my mind. Have you ever considered comparing post-partition scenarios, the journey from classical to pop for the practitioners' progenies, with the beginning of Bengali light classical modern songs by Nidhu Babu?
अरे यार, उसने तो मेरे 3 सवाल लिए, यानी कुल 6 सवालों में से, और उसमें से मतलब ये एक्चुअली इंक्लूडेड भी इन डिस्कशन, और बड़ा
शरीफ.
आज करवाया उसने कि इन्होंने इनकी तो बहुत ज्यादा सर्विस है. और वो बात हुई थी जुगलबंदी पर, मैंने लिखा था कि वो जो उसको
Can you
Shall
mute his
stop?
microphone?
Yeah,
Can you mute his microphone?
I can't.
It,
Yeah,
it is
Abhishek?
muted now. Yeah.
Yeah, done.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, yeah, let me go ahead with read the question again. Sorry. Um, uh, so it was a very interesting insight into the partition and Hindustani classical music. Listening to it, something came to my mind. Have you ever considered comparing post-partition scenarios, the journey from classical to pop for the practitioners' progenies, with the beginning of Bengali light classical slash modern songs by Nidhu Babu, Rabindranath, or D. Chandralal Roy? Bengali music, so-called folk songs like Baul, Akrai, Kobigan, etc., was looked down by Hindustani ustads at that time, 18th to 19th century period. The music for the urban, mostly middle class, came from those Nidhu Babu, Tagore, etc. Composers, and of course, from the then Bengali commercial theatre, which was a kind of identity for the then new Bengali music. Is it possible that in Pakistan, apart from religious partition problems, any search of identity also may be the reason to shift from classical to pop? So it's kind of, if I
Yeah,
summarize, it's
yeah,
basically asking
yeah.
if
So
there's
I,
like some identity based shift. Like here it
yeah,
was a
yeah. So
Bengali,
obviously,
so
I will not comment on the Bengali part because that's not my area really. But yeah, in Pakistan, we know that, as I said earlier, that there was a shift. Initially, after 1947, there were questions. Of course, the question of what is the national identity of Pakistan, that has been debated endlessly. You'll find so many write-ups, so many people have written about it, have spoken about it, that what should be the national identity of Pakistan, and obviously they want it to be different from India. So as I said, that in there are some musicians who were deliberately trying to take their tradition towards the music. For example, I found one book. As I said, that I brought many books from Pakistan on music. There is one book. I think it's written by Akhtar Shirani or Akhtar Shirazi. What he has done, he has written new compositions for classical music, new in the sense that khayal and tumri and those kind of compositions with notations, and the bandish or the poetry is totally new. It's like written in a very polished Urdu, and again very devotional kind of compositions. For example, Prophet Muhammad's birth anniversary, or those kind of themes he has taken. He has taken manqibat and naat and those devotional songs, and he has put them to music with ragas and talas and so on. So I mean, this is just one example that I'm giving you. There are some musicians, and there's another very amusing kind of example. Also, it's there on in my film Khayal Darpan. There is a Hafiz Ali Khan Sahab, who was a Dhrupad performer in Pakistan. He said that alap, the word alap is actually Allah aap, Allah the first, something like that, which I mean many people found very amusing. So I mean, these are ways to justify music in a country where it is under threat. I mean, there are some examples like that, but I would say that those were initial examples. I mean, not everybody thinks like that. And as I said, that now there is a revival, and that revival is a very, they're trying to make it a kind of a secular form of music.
yeah, the Hafiz Ali Khan example reminded me of that. They actually changed the bowl of the Nomtom Alap from, because the
Uh,
Nomtom's bowl
yeah,
is like it's a breaking of Hariom Anant Narayan, Rina Nana Rina. So they Nita Tarana. They actually changed the bowl
yeah,
of the Nomtom Alap.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I think this
Okay.
is the last question so far. There are a few comments after this, I think, as I can see. So this is from Nalini Delvoye. So,
Yeah.
so she's asking, she says, Adab, bahut bahut shukriya, Yusuf Sahab. As part of the ongoing scholarship on music in Pakistan, could you tell us about recent published editions of pre-modern Indo-Persian musicological texts and their translations into Urdu? And also about 20th century key musicological works written in Hindi, such as the works of late Acharya K.C. Brahaspati of the Rampur Nawab Court that have been translated into Urdu.
Yeah, that's really a good question. Adab, Nalini. Really good to see you here, and you listen to the whole presentation. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And as I said, that I brought a whole lot of books from Pakistan, and this was my concern. I wanted to see what is happening in these books, who is writing, and what are these books. So some of the pre-modern texts, if you look at, I would not remember all of them, which pre-modern text. But for example, I remember one name which is Tohfatul Hind. Tohfatul Hind is this book, and one part of that book was about music. There is something called Madanul Mosiqi,
Um,
which has
yeah,
been yeah. So that has been translated and published. And so many of these books, for example, there is somebody called Rag Darpan. Rag Darpan is another, I think Rag Darpan
Fakirullah.
has been translated as Fakirullah Saif Khan. So those books have been republished in Pakistan in various ways. And so, as I said, that there is a this scholarship in Pakistan. There are scholars, and these are not just scholars; they are musician scholars. I find many of them who are good musicians as well as scholars. They are also writing, they are researching, they know Persian, they know a little bit of Hindi or Sanskrit, and they are trying to write these things. So another thing that I found, that they have translated from Persian works into Urdu, and they have published those as well. There is something called the Naghmatul Asifi, if I remember the name correctly, Naghmate Asifiya. Naghmate Asifiya is another text which has been translated into Urdu and published recently. And of course, Acharya Brahaspati Sahab's book, which is about the contribution of Muslims to Indian classical music, that is like a favorite book. It was published, it was translated into Urdu and published in Pakistan, because they found that Acharya Brahaspati Sahab talks about, all these tradition, starting from Amir Khusro, and he goes into the details of how this style, the pre-Islamic style called the Gram Murchana Paddhati, how that was affected by the Turkish people who came, Paddhati was started, and so on and so forth, and how the whole system of classifying the swaras, like earlier, Indian music was based on the 22 shrutis, 22 shrutis, whereas today we have this 12 swaras or 7 swaras. So, and they say, Acharya Brahaspati Sahab talks about the fact that the Irani music and the Irani maqam music came, and it affected the Indian music, and that is where that is how the today's form was born, and newer ragas and newer thats were, it was possible to form newer ragas, newer thats, and Yaman, and all these Kafi That, and all those were able to be born. So all this work has been done. I mean, the amazing books people have written and translated. And as I said, that even somebody like Rashid Malik, who I would call him a musicologist in Urdu, he's done amazing work. And interesting. I mean, I would say that some of that work needs to be translated and um, spread further, so that people know what sort of thinking about music and musicology was happening in Pakistan after 1947.
okay, so yeah, so we have a few more comments. I can just read them out. So one was when we were talking about like projects between India and Pakistan. So Sarah Singh mentions that so there is an interesting collaboration nowadays, for example, between Kaushiki Chakraborty and Ustad Shahbaz Hussain. So he's British citizen, but he's of Pakistani descent. Uh, this is one example. Um, Ranjani Ramchandran says that so Dr. Anish Pradhan, so who is also the husband of Shubha Mudgal, so has written
Yeah.
extensively on the support of classical music through the establishment of music circles by common people from late 19th century onwards.
Yeah, that's true.
And so this in itself was a way to democratize classical music. And the other comment I can just leave. So it's so when we were mentioning about like works, so Sharif Ahmed mentions that there is one book in Persian written by Wajid Ali Shah Akhtar of Lucknow, and Amemer Minai, the great classical poet, and it was translated into Urdu by Dr. Athar Masood. I think Yusuf has dropped out because of internet issues. So just waiting. Yeah, I think he's back. Uh, yeah. So in the meantime, like while Yusuf joins, let me just briefly tell you about the Indian Alliance Paris. So um, we are a so Indian Alliance Paris is primarily a group of Indian diaspora in Paris. Most of us are students or young professionals, were mostly like-minded politically, and we were formed during the anti-CAA protest that came out in December. And over the and if anyone of so follow us on our page, the Facebook page. We are planning to host a few more webinars on different topics, which would be mostly on the socio-political and socio-cultural issues surrounding the subcontinent, with India in particular. And we also host a reading room. If you would wish, you could join us. And just follow us on our page. And if you have any questions, you can write to us on our email ID, which is also available in our Facebook page. And if you are in Paris or somewhere nearby in France, then you could, like, I don't know the situation there right now because of the corona, but I think there's a second wave coming in France. But otherwise, once that gets over, you can come and like join us, meet us. So in the meantime, let me
Hello,
see.
Manoj, can you hear me? I went out.
Yes.
I sorry, the I got disconnected, so I could not hear some of your.
Yeah, so I was just introducing Indian Alliance Paris in the meantime.
Okay.
So yes, I think that's kind of all the questions that is like been questions and comments. I myself have one question specifically, since you spent some time in Pakistan. So there is this gharana called the Peshawar Wales. I am not sure where they come from. It's Ashik Ali Khan Peshawar Wale, who's also known as Bira Ashik in Pakistan. Then there was somebody called, if I'm not wrong, Hashmat Ali Khan Peshawar Wale, not to be confused with the Hashmat Ali Khan, the tabla player. Uh, so, do you know anything about this gharana?
Uh, no, I would not know much. I mean, Peshawar is definitely a place which had like Lahore, it had a culture of listening to music, and large number of people, even from India, they must have gone to Peshawar and performed there. But I'm not very sure of the Peshawar Gharana, and some of the names that you are talking about. I mean, there are similar names in Indian side also, like Hashmat Ali Khan, and what's the other name you said?
No, so Hashmat Ali Khan in Indian is the tabla player of Hajrada. So this is not.
Yeah.
So this person
So
has
I'm
no
not sure.
relations with him. The
I'm
other
not
person, like for example, in Pakistan, if you say Ashik Ali Khan, you would generally think the
Patiala
the
Gharana also has
Patiala one. But
yeah,
no, this is another. This is another like
Patiala and Kasoor Gharana.
Yes, but this is another Ashrik Ali Khan who also goes by the name
Maybe,
Ashik Ali Khan Peshawar
maybe
Wale.
it's still
And
possible.
if I'm not wrong, I got introduced to these people through the same archive you're talking about, Lutfullah Khan's archive.
Uh-huh.
So, um, the other question on Pakistan also. So, if I'm not wrong, Sham Chaurashi had like a Drupad tradition built in. So, I have only heard one recording, a rag Lalit Bahar,
Yeah.
by a person called um, Niaz Hussain Khan, probably.
Uh-huh.
I am forgetting the name, but that's the only one. Just like I
Okay.
searched, I couldn't find anything, and I mean, the max I could find out it's like a Drupad tradition of Sham Chaurasia, like the
Yeah.
Drupad version of what Salamat Ali Khan and all would sing.
Hmm.
So
Actually, after
no,
Salamat Nazakat Ali Khan, I don't think anybody would have performed Drupad tradition from their family, because till their time, of course, they were performing Khayal and other, things, but I don't think after them anybody would have performed. Maybe parallel to them, somebody of their generation would have performed. But they were the only two people who came from Shamcharasi. I'm not sure if there were other people.
yeah, okay. So okay, Sharif Ahmed written. So Niaz
Yeah,
Hussain
Niaz and
Shamli
Shami.
was a great senior vocalist of Sham Chaurashi Gharana, senior to Ustad Salamat Ali Khan. Okay, so if I don't think there are any further questions. So let us thank Yusuf again for this
Huh.
excellent session. Thank you so much for agreeing on, in fact, on a very short notice to to this webinar.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thanks a
So
lot. Okay. Bye.
th- thanks all the audience for being here for quite some time now. It's almost 2 hours and
Yeah.
asking questions and all. So thanks a lot. Do stay in touch with Indian Alliance Paris if you are if you found ourselves to be of interest, and thanks to everyone. So let us close this session now. Thank you.